A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Broken Trust. The scent of jasmine and rain clung to Jade Sterling's hair as she pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the alley, her breath forming small clouds in the October air. 26 years old, and she felt ancient. Broken. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to keep running, but exhaustion weighed her limbs like lead chains. 3 days. It had been 3 days since she'd escaped Victor's suffocating grip. 3 days of sleeping in homeless shelters and public restrooms. 3 days of constantly looking over her shoulder for his familiar silhouette. Her nursing scrubs were wrinkled and stained, her auburn curls matted against her scalp, and the thin jacket she'd grabbed during her frantic escape did nothing to shield her from the biting wind. But she was alive. That had to count for something. The memories crashed over her like broken glass, sharp and unforgiving. 4 years ago, she'd been so different. Fresh out of nursing school, optimistic about the future, believing that her rare healing abilities made her special rather than a target. She'd met Victor Grimm at a pack gathering, drawn to his confident smile and the way other shifters deferred to him. He'd been charming then, protective in a way that had made her feel cherished rather than owned. How naive she'd been. Victor had courted her with flowers and expensive dinners, whispered promises about building a future together. His pack territories were prosperous, his reputation among alphas solid, his home a sprawling estate that spoke of old money and older power. When he'd asked her to move in after only 3 months of dating, she'd been flattered by his urgency rather than alarmed. "I can't stand being apart from you," he'd murmured against her neck, his arms encircling her waist as they stood in his marble foyer. "This place feels empty without your scent in every room." The first red flag had been subtle. He'd suggested she quit her job at the children's hospital, claiming her healing abilities were too valuable to waste on human patients who would never appreciate her gift. When she'd protested that she loved nursing, loved helping people, he'd pulled her closer and kissed her forehead with tender condescension. "Of course you want to help people, sweetheart. That's what makes you so perfect. But think about how much more good you could do for our pack, for our future pups. Humans don't understand what you are. They'd fear you if they knew the truth." She'd compromised, reducing her hours instead of quitting entirely. It had felt like a reasonable middle ground at the time. Looking back, she could see how each small concession had paved the way for larger surrenders. The first time he'd hit her, she'd made excuses. Stress from pack politics, pressure from his alpha duties, too much alcohol at the monthly council meeting. The second time, she'd told herself it was an accident, that she'd provoked him by questioning his decisions in front of other pack members. By the 10th time, she'd stopped counting and started believing his whispered apologies in the dark. "I'm sorry, baby," he'd murmur against her hair, his fingers tracing the bruises he'd left on her skin. "You know I love you. You just push me sometimes. Make me lose control. If you could just be more careful about how you speak to me in public." Control. That word had become the foundation of her prison. Victor controlled her schedule, her friendships, her access to money. He'd convinced her to hand over her nursing license, for safekeeping, claiming that having a mate in the medical profession created liability issues for the pack. When she'd tried to visit her sister in Portland, he'd hidden her car keys and locked her in their shared apartment for a week, explaining that traveling without pack escort was too dangerous for someone with her abilities. When her colleague, Dr. Morrison, had called to check on her after she'd missed several shifts, Victor had answered the phone and informed the hospital that Jade had suffered a nervous breakdown and would not be returning. The betrayal had cut deeper than any physical blow. "You don't need to work," he'd said afterward, his gray eyes cold despite his gentle tone. "I provide for you. That's what a real mate does. Besides, you're too fragile for that environment. All those sick children, all that death and suffering. It was making you depressed, but it hadn't been about protecting her mental health. It had been about isolation, about making her dependent, breaking her down piece by piece until she forgot who she'd been before him. He'd systematically severed her connections to the outside world, convincing mutual friends that she'd become unstable and needed space, intercepting mail from her family, even going so far as to change her cell phone number without telling her. The final straw had come when he'd discovered the true extent of her healing abilities. Jade's hands trembled as she remembered that night 2 weeks ago. She'd been tending to a deep gash on Victor's forearm after a territorial dispute with a neighboring pack. The wound had been angry and infected, the kind that would normally take weeks to heal properly, even with shifter regeneration. Without thinking, she'd pressed her palms against the injury, letting her natural beta healing abilities flow through her fingertips. The cut had sealed instantly, leaving only smooth skin behind. Even the infection had vanished, purged by whatever strange energy flowed through her touch. Victor had gone very still. Too still. "Do it again," he'd commanded, his voice strange, hungry. She'd hesitated, sensing danger in his sudden intensity like a rabbit scenting a wolf on the wind. "It's already healed, Victor. There's nothing left to—" He'd grabbed a kitchen knife and sliced his palm open, blood spattering across their granite countertop. "I said do it again." That's when she'd realized the truth. Her healing abilities weren't just rare among betas. They were virtually unheard of. She could heal serious injuries with just a touch, something that even most pack healers couldn't accomplish without herbs, ceremonies, and considerable time. In Victor's eyes, she'd seen the exact moment he'd stopped seeing her as his mate and started seeing her as property, as a resource to be hoarded and exploited. The next day, he'd installed new locks on their apartment, electronic ones that required a key to open from the inside. "It's for your protection," he'd explained when she'd stared at the locks in horror. "There are people who would hurt you for what you can do, kill for it even. Other packs, rogues, humans who've heard whispers about our kind. This way I know you're safe while I'm handling pack business." Safe. Trapped. Same thing, in Victor's mind. Over the following weeks, she'd watched him transform into someone she barely recognized. He'd started bringing injured pack members to their home, demanding that she heal their wounds regardless of the hour or her own exhaustion. When she'd protested that using her abilities extensively left her drained and sick, he'd dismissed her concerns with cold pragmatism. "This is what you were born for," he'd said, watching her hands shake after healing the third shifter that day. "Stop being selfish. The pack needs you." But prisons only worked if the prisoner believed they deserved to be caged. And somewhere between the 7th and 8th time, Victor had used her healing abilities to cover up evidence of his own violence, forcing her to heal the injuries he'd inflicted on pack members who dared to question his authority. She'd stopped believing his justifications. The storm that had raged through the city 3 nights ago had been her salvation. Lightning had knocked out the power grid in their neighborhood, disabling the electronic locks Victor had installed. In the chaos of emergency pack meetings and territory patrols, she'd grabbed what little cash she'd managed to hide away over the months and fled into the rain-soaked streets. Now, huddled in this alley with her stomach gnawing at her ribs and her body aching from sleeping on concrete benches, she wondered if freedom was worth this agony. At least with Victor, she'd been fed, sheltered, warm, even if the cost had been her soul. A strange current pulsed through her as emotion overwhelmed rational thought, something deeper than her healing abilities, wilder and more dangerous. She'd always felt it during moments of extreme stress, a dark energy that made her fingertips tingle and her vision sharpen, but she'd never dared explore it, terrified of what she might discover about herself. What if Victor was right? What if she was too dangerous to exist freely in the world? Jade pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and forced herself to move. The homeless shelter 6 blocks away would open its doors in an hour, but she needed to be careful about which route she took. Victor had connections throughout the shifter community, and his pack members had been scouring the city looking for her. She'd caught glimpses of familiar faces at bus stops and coffee shops, always watching, always hunting. She was nobody now, a runaway mate with no money, no pack, and nowhere to turn. But at least she was free to choose her own misery. As she stepped out of the alley and into the bustling evening crowds, Jade Sterling made herself a promise. Whatever happened next, wherever this desperate flight led her, she would never again let anyone cage her healing light, even if it killed her. The city stretched before her like a maze of possibilities, each street corner a choice between hiding and moving forward. For the first time in years, the decision was entirely her own. She chose to keep running. Chapter 2. Sanctuary. found the sense hit Jade like a physical wall the moment she stepped within 3 blocks of Le Jardin Noir. Power. Authority. The unmistakable musk of multiple alphas gathered in one location, their combined presence thick enough to choke on. Her beta instinct screamed at her to turn around, to find somewhere safer to hide. But desperation overrode self-preservation. If there were that many dominant shifters in one place, surely Victor wouldn't dare cause a scene trying to retrieve her. She'd overheard 2 pack members discussing the restaurant earlier that morning while she'd hidden behind a dumpster near the financial district. Something about important meetings and territorial negotiations. The kind of high-level shifter politics that drew the most powerful alphas from across the region. Perfect cover for a runaway beta with nowhere else to turn. Rain began to fall as she approached the elegant establishment, its French architecture gleaming under the warm glow of antique street lamps. Through the tall windows, she could see figures in expensive suits and designer dresses, their postures radiating confidence and wealth. This was a mistake. She didn't belong in a place like this, not with her wrinkled scrubs and tangled hair. But before she could lose her nerve, the familiar silhouette of Victor's pickup truck rounded the corner 2 blocks away. Her blood turned to ice. He'd found her again. Without thinking, Jade pushed through the heavy glass doors and into Le Jardin Noir's opulent interior. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across cream-colored walls adorned with original oil paintings. The air thrummed with barely contained power, making her skin prickle with awareness. Every conversation seemed muted, conducted in the low tones of people accustomed to being obeyed. She pressed herself against the wall beside the coat check, trying to become invisible as her eyes searched for the bathroom or a back exit. Anything to avoid the scene Victor would inevitably create when he stormed in looking for her. That's when she saw him. He sat at a corner table with 4 other men, all of them radiating the kind of authority that made lesser shifters automatically lower their eyes. But even among alphas, this one stood apart. 35 years old, maybe older, with black hair and a perfectly groomed beard that framed strong, aristocratic features. His suit probably cost more than she'd made in 6 months as a nurse, cut to emphasize broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. But it was his eyes that stopped her breathing. Amber gold, like liquid fire, and currently focused on documents spread across the white tablecloth. When he gestured to make a point, the other alphas leaned in with the deference reserved for someone at the very top of the food chain. Jade's wolf stirred for the first time in months, a low hum of recognition that she didn't understand. Something about his scent called to her, even from across the room. Cedar and smoke, with an underlying warmth that made her want to step closer instead of running away. The front door chimed, and her heart stopped. Victor strode in like he owned the place, flanked by 2 of his enforcers. His gray eyes swept the restaurant with predatory focus until they locked onto her cowering form by the coat check. Time slowed to a crawl as Victor began moving toward her, his lips curling in a smile that promised punishment. The enforcers spread out to block any escape routes, their casual positioning making it clear they'd done this before. Panic overrode pride. Jade stumbled toward the corner table where the powerful stranger sat, her legs shaking so badly she could barely remain upright. The closer she got, the stronger his scent became, wrapping around her like a protective embrace. "Please," she whispered as she reached the table, her voice barely audible over the blood pounding in her ears. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but please, just pretend you know me." 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her with varying degrees of surprise and calculation. But the amber-eyed man simply looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable as he took in her disheveled appearance and obvious distress. "Jade," he said, as if her name was the most natural thing in the world. "You're late." The relief that crashed through her was so intense, it nearly brought her to her knees. She slipped into the empty chair beside him, hyper-aware of the warmth radiating from his body and the way his presence seemed to calm her fraying nerves. Victor appeared at their table moments later, his face flushed with barely contained rage. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight with false politeness. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop several degrees. Around them, conversations ceased as other diners turned to watch the confrontation. Even the waitstaff had gone still, sensing the dangerous undercurrents flowing between the 2 alphas. "I'm sorry," the stranger replied, his tone pleasant, but carrying an edge that made Jade's skin prickle. "And you are?" "Victor Grimm, Alpha of the East Side Pack." Victor's chest puffed with pride as he announced his title. "This is my mate, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop interfering with pack business." The stranger set down his wineglass with deliberate care, and Jade noticed how the other men at the table had gone completely motionless. Even Victor's enforcers had taken an unconscious step backward. "Your mate?" The stranger's voice remained conversational, but something predatory flickered in those golden eyes. "Interesting, because she asked me to pretend I knew her. Why would a properly mated female need protection from her own alpha?" Victor's face went red. "That's none of your concern. Jade, get over here, now." The command hit her like a physical blow, her beta nature responding instinctively to alpha authority. She started to rise, old habits and conditioning overriding rational thought, but a warm hand settled gently on her wrist. "I wouldn't," the stranger said quietly, and something in his voice made Victor take a half-step backward. "The lady seems comfortable where she is." That's when Victor's expression changed, shifting from anger to something approaching fear. His nostrils flared as he caught a better scent of the man beside Jade, and his face went pale. "You're—" Victor's voice cracked slightly. "Alpha King Greymont. I didn't realize. That is, I apologize for the interruption." Alpha King. The words hit Jade like a thunderbolt. She was sitting beside the Alpha King of the 5 regions, the most powerful shifter on the continent. No wonder every alpha in the restaurant had gone quiet. No wonder Victor looked like he might faint. Vander Greymont smiled, but there was nothing friendly about the expression. "Apology noted. Now I believe you were leaving." It wasn't a suggestion. Victor's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Jade and the man who could destroy his entire pack with a single phone call. "Of course, Your Majesty. But she is my mate, legally bonded. I have rights. You have the right to leave my sight before I lose what little patience I have left." Vander's voice remained level, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. "Whether you exercise that right is entirely up to you." Victor's hands clenched into fists, his wolf clearly warring with his survival instincts. For a moment, Jade thought he might actually challenge the Alpha King, consequences be damned. But then one of his enforcers touched his shoulder and whispered something urgent in his ear. "This isn't over." Victor snarled, his gray eyes boring into Jade with promised retribution. "You belong to me, and I'll get you back." Then he turned and stalked toward the exit, his enforcers trailing behind like whipped dogs. The moment the door closed behind them, the restaurant slowly returned to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones that didn't quite disguise the excited undercurrents. Jade realized she was shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief of having survived another encounter with Victor. She turned toward her unlikely savior, prepared to stammer out her gratitude, but found herself caught in his intense amber gaze. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and she was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "No, She started, then stopped. How could she explain that the damage Victor had done went far deeper than anything visible? "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me." "You would have figured something out," Vander said with quiet certainty. "You're stronger than you realize." Something warm unfurled in her chest at his words. When was the last time someone had seen strength in her instead of weakness to exploit? "Vander," one of the other alphas at the table spoke up. "Perhaps we should postpone this meeting until—" "The meeting is concluded," Vander said, without looking away from Jade. "We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize the territorial agreements." The dismissal was clear, and the other alphas gathered their papers with varying degrees of reluctance. Jade noticed how they nodded respectfully to Vander before leaving, their deference absolute. When they were alone, the silence stretched between them like a held breath. Jade knew she should leave, should disappear back into the city before she caused any more trouble for this man who'd already risked so much to help her. But something kept her frozen in place, caught between gratitude and an inexplicable sense of belonging. "What's your real name?" Vander asked quietly. She blinked in surprise. "You said Jade like you knew me." "Lucky guess." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You look like a Jade." Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling back. "Jade Sterling. "Well, Jade Sterling," Vander said, signaling the waiter for another bottle of wine. "Why don't you tell me why the alpha of the East Side pack thinks he owns you?" The question hit her like a physical blow, bringing back memories she'd tried to bury. But something in his tone, patient, non-judgmental, made her want to answer honestly. "Because until 3 days ago," she whispered, "he did." Chapter 3. Shelter from the Storm. Vander's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Greymont Tower, a gleaming monument to power that dominated the city's skyline. As the private elevator rose silently through 43 floors, Jade pressed herself against the mirrored wall and tried to process what was happening to her life. 6 hours ago, she'd been huddled in an alley contemplating whether freedom was worth starving for. Now she was ascending to the private residence of the most powerful shifter in North America, her hand still tingling from where he'd helped her into his car. "You don't have to be afraid," Vander said quietly, his amber eyes studying her reflection in the polished steel doors. "I'm not going to hurt you." Jade met his gaze in the mirror, searching for deception and finding only patient sincerity. "I don't understand why you're helping me. You don't even know me. I know enough." The elevator chimed softly as they reached the penthouse. "I know Victor Grimm is a coward who preys on those weaker than himself. I know you were brave enough to escape him despite having nowhere to go. And I know you're exhausted, hungry, and in need of somewhere safe to sleep." The doors opened to reveal a living space that belonged in an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, while modern furniture in shades of charcoal and cream created an atmosphere of understated luxury. But it was the warmth of the space that surprised her. Fresh flowers on the coffee table, books scattered casually on the shelves, a soft throw draped over the leather sofa, as if someone actually lived here rather than just existing. "This is beautiful," she breathed, stepping into the open-plan living area. The scent that had called to her in the restaurant was stronger here, woven into every surface. Cedar and smoke, and something uniquely Vander that made her wolf purr with contentment. "The guest bedroom is down the hall," he said, shrugging out of his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. "There's a bathroom attached, towels in the linen closet. Help yourself to anything you need." Jade turned to face him, suddenly aware of how she must look in his pristine home. "I should probably shower," she said, self-conscious about her appearance for the first time in days. "I haven't had access to proper facilities since you escaped." Vander finished gently. "Take all the time you need. I'll order some food." She nodded gratefully and headed toward the hallway he'd indicated, but his voice stopped her at the threshold. "Jade." When she turned back, his expression was serious. "The doors here don't lock from the outside. You can leave whenever you want to. This isn't a cage." The words hit her like a physical blow, addressing the fear she hadn't even voiced. Of course he would understand. He'd seen the terror in her eyes when Victor had appeared, had witnessed the way she'd instinctively flinched from alpha authority, even while asking for help. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it more than he could possibly know. The guest bedroom was larger than the apartment she'd shared with Victor, decorated in soothing blues and grays that immediately put her at ease. She stood under the rainfall shower for what felt like hours, washing away 3 days of grime and fear until her skin was pink and raw. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel softer than anything she'd ever touched, she found clothes laid out on the bed, designer jeans in her exact size, a cashmere sweater the color of forest moss, and undergarments still bearing boutique tags. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, and the fact that he'd somehow known her measurements, should have been unsettling. Instead, she found herself blinking back grateful tears. She dressed slowly, marveling at how different she felt in clothes that fit properly and didn't smell of desperation. When she caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Clean hair falling in damp waves past her shoulders, green eyes bright with something other than fear for the first time in months. She looked like herself again. Vander was in the kitchen when she emerged, sleeves rolled up as he plated what appeared to be gourmet takeout from one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The domestic scene was so at odds with his earlier display of absolute authority that she hesitated in the doorway, unsure how to reconcile the two versions of him. "Feeling better?" he asked without looking up. though she was certain he'd sensed her presence the moment she'd entered the room. Much. Thank you for the clothes. How did you know my size? This time he did glance up, and she caught something that might have been embarrassment flicker across his features. I called my assistant. She's good at estimating these things. Jade doubted that was the complete truth, but she let it slide. You didn't have to go to so much trouble. It wasn't trouble. He gestured toward the dining table, where he'd set out enough food for a small army. Are you hungry? Her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal since her escape. Starving, she admitted. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes. Jade, too, focused on the food to maintain conversation. Everything tasted like ambrosia after days of vending machine snacks and shelter rations. It wasn't until she'd taken the edge off her hunger that she became aware of Vander watching her, with those perceptive amber eyes. Better? He asked. God, yes. I'd forgotten what real food tasted like. She paused, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I probably look like a savage. You look like someone who's been surviving, he corrected. There's no shame in that. The kindness in his voice made her chest tight. When was the last time someone had spoken to her without judgment or expectation? Why are you being so nice to me? You could have just told Victor to back off and left it at that. Vander was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass as he considered his answer. Because you reminded me of someone I used to know, he said eventually. Someone who needed help and didn't get it in time. The weight of old pain in his voice made her want to reach across the table and comfort him, but she settled for changing the subject. How long have you been the Alpha King? Officially, 8 years. Unofficially, I've been groomed for the position since birth. He took a sip of his wine. The Greymont line has held the crown for 4 generations. It's not something you retire from. That sounds lonely. He looked surprised by her observation. Most people focus on the power aspect. Power doesn't keep you warm at night, Jade said softly, then blushed at the intimacy of the statement. I mean, I know what you meant. His eyes had gone thoughtful. You're right, though. It can be isolating. Emboldened by his openness, she leaned forward slightly. Is that why you were alone tonight? At the restaurant? I'm rarely truly alone. There are always advisors, guards, pack members who need decisions made. He paused. But yes, I suppose I was alone in the ways that matter. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Jade found herself studying his face in the soft light, noting the lines of stress around his eyes, and the careful control he maintained even in the privacy of his own home. The weight of leadership sat heavily on those broad shoulders. What about you? He asked, deflecting attention from himself. Tell me about your healing abilities. She went very still, her fork freezing halfway to her mouth. What makes you think I have healing abilities? Earlier, in the restaurant, you were favoring your left wrist, but I don't see any injury now. Either you healed remarkably fast, or you healed yourself. His tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of the hunger she'd grown to fear whenever someone discovered her gift. It's not that unusual, she said carefully. Lots of betas have some healing capacity, not like yours. He set down his glass and gave her his full attention. When Victor mentioned you belonged to him, there was a possessiveness there that went beyond normal mate bonds. He was protecting an asset. The accuracy of his assessment sent ice through her veins. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Vander's voice remained gentle, but his eyes had sharpened. Show me your wrists, Jade. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Earlier, you were covering them with your hands. Old defensive habit? Or are you hiding something? Against her better judgment, she found herself rolling up her sleeves. The thin silver scars were barely visible now, just faint lines across her pulse points, where Victor had restrained her during particularly brutal healing sessions. But Vander's expression darkened as he took in the evidence. He chained you. It wasn't a question. Jade pulled her sleeves back down, suddenly cold, despite the warmth of the apartment. I don't want to talk about this. You don't have to. But I want you to know that what he did to you, what he forced you to do, none of that was your fault. The unexpected absolution broke something loose in her chest. You don't understand. The things I healed for him, the injuries I covered up, I was complicit. You were surviving. Vander leaned forward, his intensity filling the space between them. There's a difference between choosing to enable someone and being coerced into it. Jade stared down at her plate, emotions churning too close to the surface. I could have fought back harder, could have refused, and he would have hurt you worse, or killed you. Vander's voice carried absolute certainty. Men like Victor don't respond to resistance with reason, Jade. They escalate. The truth of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. For so long she'd carried the guilt of her perceived weakness, believing that a stronger person would have found a way to escape sooner. But sitting here in his warm kitchen, seeing the understanding in his eyes, she began to wonder if maybe survival had been its own form of strength. I felt something different earlier, she said quietly. When I was really stressed, there was this energy that didn't feel like healing. It felt darker. Vander went very still. What kind of energy? I don't know. It scared me, so I never explored it. But when Victor was coming toward me in the restaurant, I could feel it building up inside me like electricity. Interesting. He was studying her with new fascination. Not all gifts manifest the same way. Sometimes trauma can suppress abilities until we're in extreme situations. The suggestion that there might be more to her than even she understood was both thrilling and terrifying. What if I'm dangerous? What if Victor was right to keep me locked up? Victor was a coward who saw power in you and wanted to own it rather than respect it. Vander's voice carried the ring of absolute authority. That says everything about him and nothing about you. For the first time since her escape, Jade felt something uncoil in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginnings of self-acceptance. She was still broken, still afraid, still carrying scars that might never fully heal. But sitting across from this powerful man who looked at her with respect rather than hunger, she began to believe that maybe broken didn't mean worthless. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing more in me than I see in myself. Vander's expression softened. You'll get there, Jade Sterling. Give yourself time. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, full of promise and possibility. For the first time in years, the future felt like something worth living for. Chapter 4. Hidden Depths. 5 days had passed since Jade had first set foot in Vander's penthouse, and she was beginning to understand why isolation came so naturally to him. The man worked like a machine, disappearing into his home office before dawn and emerging well after sunset, his phone constantly buzzing with urgent messages that required the Alpha King's immediate attention. She'd fallen into an easy routine, one that felt dangerously close to domestic normalcy. Morning coffee while watching the sun rise over the city skyline. Afternoon reading sessions in the library alcove, losing herself in books she'd never had time to explore when Victor controlled every moment of her day. Evening meals shared in comfortable silence, both of them too exhausted to maintain conversation. It was during these quiet dinners that she'd begun to study him, noting the tension that never quite left his shoulders and the way he rubbed his temples when he thought she wasn't watching. The weight of leadership was taking its toll, and her healer's instincts responded to his obvious discomfort. You're in pain, she said on the 6th evening, setting down her fork as she watched him massage his neck with practiced efficiency. Vander's hand stilled. It's nothing serious. Occupational hazard of spending 12 hours hunched over territorial agreements. Let me help. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and she immediately flushed with embarrassment. I mean, if you want, I could... Jade. His voice was gentle but firm. You don't owe me anything. You don't need to earn your place here by offering your abilities. The fact that he'd understood her motivation so clearly made her chest tight with gratitude and shame. It's not about debt. You're hurting, and I have the ability to fix it. Why wouldn't I want to help someone who's been kind to me? Vander studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for hidden motives or signs of coercion. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. All right, but only if you're certain. She moved behind his chair, suddenly nervous as the reality of touching him hit her. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful shifter on the continent. The fact that he was allowing her this close spoke to a level of trust she wasn't sure she deserved. Tell me if I hurt you, she whispered, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. The The moment her palms made contact with his skin through the thin cotton of his shirt, heat flowed between them like liquid fire. Her healing abilities activated instinctively, seeking out the knots of tension in his muscles and the stress-induced inflammation in his neck and shoulders. But alongside the familiar warmth of her gift, something else stirred. That strange electric energy she'd felt during moments of extreme emotion. Vander went rigid beneath her touch, his breath catching in his throat. "Jade, am I hurting you?" She started to pull away, but his hand came up to cover hers, holding her in place. "No," he said roughly. "The opposite." She could feel the tension melting from his body as her abilities worked. But the other energy, the dark current she'd never understood, pulsed just beneath the surface. It felt connected to him somehow, drawn to his strength like iron filings to a magnet. "There's something else," she murmured, her hands moving to his temples as she followed the threads of pain through his system. "Not just physical tension. You're carrying too much weight, Vander. The stress is eating you alive from the inside." His eyes closed as her fingertips traced gentle circles against his skin. "The crown comes with responsibilities that most people can't understand. Every decision I make affects thousands of lives. Every mistake has consequences that ripple through entire territories. And you carry all of that alone." It wasn't a question. She could feel it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his body held onto stress like armor against the world. "Loneliness is the price of absolute authority," he said quietly. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford." The admission broke her heart. Here was a man who could command armies with a word, who had wealth and power beyond imagination, and yet he was as isolated as she had been in Victor's cage. Different prisons, same fundamental isolation. "You trusted me," she pointed out, her hands continuing their gentle ministrations. "You're different." "How?" Vander was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't want anything from me. Everyone else sees the crown first, the man second. You see me." The raw honesty in his words made her chest ache. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to the top of his head, a gesture of comfort rather than passion. But the moment her lips touched his hair, that strange energy surged through her like lightning. Vander jerked upright, spinning in his chair to face her. His amber eyes were wide with shock, but also something that looked like recognition. "What was that?" he demanded. "I don't know." Her hands were shaking, the mysterious current still humming beneath her skin. "I felt it too. That energy. It's not like my healing abilities. It's something else entirely." He stood slowly, moving into her personal space with predatory grace. This close, she could see the golden flecks in his irises and smell the cedar smoke scent that called to her wolf. "How long have you been able to do that?" "I've always felt something different when I'm emotionally overwhelmed, but I never explored it. Victor said it was dangerous, that I needed to suppress it. Victor was an idiot." Vander's voice carried absolute conviction. "That energy you're feeling, it's not dangerous. It's recognition." "Recognition of what?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, the touch sending sparks racing down her spine. "Of me. Of this connection between us." Before she could ask what he meant, his phone rang with the shrill urgency of an emergency call. Vander cursed under his breath, but answered on the second ring, his alpha authority snapping into place like armor. "Greymont." A pause, then his expression darkened. "When? How many witnesses?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Lock down all access points and don't let anyone near the scene until I arrive." He ended the call and turned back to Jade, regret clear in his eyes. "I have to go. There's been an incident at one of the pack territories that requires my immediate attention." "Of course." She stepped back, already missing the warmth of his touch. "Is everything okay?" "It will be." He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "Jade, what happened just now?" "I won't tell anyone," she said quickly, assuming he was worried about his reputation. "I understand that the Alpha King can't be seen as—" "That's not what I'm worried about." His voice was fierce with conviction. "I'm worried about you, about what this means for your safety." Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving toward his bedroom, gathering keys and weapons with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he was dressed in black tactical gear that emphasized the dangerous predator beneath his civilized exterior. "Lock the door behind me," he said, pausing at the elevator. "Don't answer it for anyone except me. If there's an emergency, call Marcus. His number is programmed into the house phone. Vander, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" His expression softened slightly. "Probably nothing. But until I know for certain, I need you to be careful. Promise me." "I promise." The elevator doors closed between them, leaving Jade alone in the sudden silence of the penthouse. She stood there for several minutes, processing what had just happened between them. The healing session had felt different from anything she'd experienced before, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the man himself. That strange current still hummed beneath her skin, stronger now than it had ever been. Whatever was happening to her abilities, whatever Victor had tried to suppress, it was growing stronger in Vander's presence. The question was whether that was a good thing or a sign of danger yet to come. She made herself a cup of tea and settled in to wait for his return, trying to ignore the growing certainty that whatever incident had called him away was somehow connected to her. In her experience, coincidences were rarely innocent, and the timing of the emergency, right after their moment of connection, felt too convenient to be random. Outside the penthouse windows, the city glittered in the darkness, full of hidden threats and watching eyes. Somewhere out there, Victor was plotting his next move, and now, apparently, other forces were stirring as well. Jade pulled Vander's throw blanket around her shoulders and tried not to think about how quickly her sanctuary might be about to crumble. She'd been hiding for less than a week, but already the walls were closing in. The question was whether she'd be strong enough to fight back when they finally collapsed completely. The strange energy pulsed through her veins like a promise of power yet to be discovered. For the first time since her escape, she found herself hoping she'd have the chance to find out what she was truly capable of. But first, Vander had to come home safely. Everything else could wait until then. Chapter 5. Shattered Illusions. The discovery came by accident. Jade had been searching for a phone charger in Vander's home office when her fingers brushed against a manila folder tucked beneath a stack of territorial maps. The official seal of the 5 Regions Council glinted in the lamplight, and her own name was written across the tab in Vander's precise handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it, expecting to find basic background information. Birth records, maybe? Or employment history. Instead, she found herself staring at detailed medical reports, psychological evaluations, and surveillance photos dating back months before their first meeting. Photos of her leaving the hospital where she'd worked. Photos of her grocery shopping with Victor. Photos of her sitting alone in coffee shops, during the brief periods when Victor had allowed her out of the apartment. Someone had been watching her long before she'd ever heard the name Vander Greymont. The medical reports were worse. Detailed analyses of her healing abilities based on observational data, complete with theories about the potential applications of her gift. One report, stamped with the royal seal, recommended immediate acquisition and protective custody for her own safety and the security of Shifter Society. She was still staring at the documents when she heard the elevator chime in the distance. Vander was home. Jade quickly photographed several key pages with her phone, then returned the folder to its hiding place. By the time his footsteps echoed in the hallway, she was sitting casually at his desk, scrolling through news articles on his computer, as if she belonged there. "Any luck finding that charger?" he asked from the doorway, and she was amazed by how normal his voice sounded when her entire world had just crumbled around her. "No, I'll grab one tomorrow," she said, proud of how steady her own voice remained. "How did everything go with the pack emergency?" Something flickered across his expression. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. False alarm. Border dispute that got blown out of proportion. Nothing that couldn't wait until morning, as it turned out. The lie hit her like a physical blow. She'd spent hours researching the incident online, finding news reports about a rogue attack on the Eastern Territories that had left 3 shifters dead. No false alarm. No blown proportion. A real emergency that he'd handled with his usual deadly efficiency. "I'm glad it wasn't serious," she managed. Vander moved into the room, and she caught the scent of smoke and blood on his clothes. Evidence of violence that gave weight to her growing suspicions. He'd lied about the nature of the emergency, just like he'd been lying about everything else since the moment they'd met. "You look tired," he observed, studying her face with those perceptive amber eyes. "Why don't you get some rest?" "Actually, I think I'll stay up for a while. Read in the library, maybe." She stood to leave, desperate to put distance between them before her composure cracked entirely. "Jade." His voice stopped her at the threshold. "Is everything all right? You seem different." The concern in his tone might have been genuine, but she no longer trusted her ability to distinguish truth from manipulation. "Just tired, like you said. Good night, Vander." She escaped to her bedroom and locked the door, then sat on the edge of the bed with her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken of her file. Each document painted a clearer picture of a deception that ran far deeper than she'd imagined. The surveillance had begun 6 months ago, shortly after Victor had discovered the full extent of her abilities. Someone in Vander's organization had been feeding him regular reports about her condition, her treatment, even her escape attempts. He'd known exactly where to find her that night at the restaurant, because he'd been tracking her movements all along. Their meeting hadn't been chance. It had been a carefully orchestrated rescue, designed to look spontaneous while serving his own purposes, whatever those purposes were. The worst part was how easily she'd fallen for it. A few kind words, some expensive clothes, and a comfortable prison had been enough to make her forget every lesson Victor had taught her about trusting powerful men. She'd been so grateful for his protection that she'd never questioned his motives. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Her blood turned to ice as she read the words on the screen. "Having fun playing house with the Alpha King? Time to come home, pet. You have 1 hour to meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. Or your new protector learns exactly how dangerous you can be when properly motivated. Come alone, or he dies." The message was unsigned, but she recognized Victor's particular brand of psychological warfare. He'd found her, just as she'd always known he would. Worse, he'd somehow discovered her growing feelings for Vander, and intended to use them against her. Jade's hands shook as she deleted the message and grabbed her jacket. She couldn't risk Vander's safety, not when she was the reason Victor had focused his attention on the Alpha King in the first place. If she left now, quietly, maybe Victor would be satisfied with reclaiming his lost property without escalating to violence. She was halfway to the elevator when Vander emerged from his office, his expression shifting to alarm when he saw her coat and purse. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Out." She couldn't meet his eyes, afraid of what he might read there. "I need some air." "At midnight?" His voice carried the unmistakable tone of alpha authority. "Jade, what's wrong?" The command hit her beta instincts like a physical blow, but she fought against the compulsion to obey. "Nothing's wrong. I just need space to think." Space to think about what? She finally looked at him, taking in the sharp intelligence in his amber eyes and the predatory stillness of his posture. How had she ever believed he was just a concerned stranger who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time? "About how long you've been lying to me," she said quietly. The words hung between them like a blade. Vander went very still, his expression shifting from concern to something harder and more calculating. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," he said carefully. "But things aren't always what they seem." "Aren't they?" Jade pulled out her phone and scrolled to one of the surveillance photos. This was taken 3 months ago, 3 months before our supposedly chance meeting at the restaurant. "Want to explain how that works?" Vander's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny what she was showing him. "How did you find those files?" "Does it matter? The point is you've been watching me, studying me, planning whatever this is." She gestured between them. "Everything you said about trust and choice and not keeping me caged, it was all lies." "Not lies," he said, moving closer despite her obvious desire for distance. "I never intended for you to be hurt by this situation." "Hurt by what situation exactly? What am I to you, Vander? A research subject? A valuable asset to be acquired and protected?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. When he didn't immediately deny them, Jade felt something break inside her chest. "That's what I thought," she whispered. "Jade, wait." He reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "No, I won't be anyone's prisoner again. Not even a comfortable one." She turned toward the elevator, but his voice stopped her cold. "If you leave now, you'll be dead within an hour. The certainty in his tone made her turn back. What do you know? Victor has been planning this for weeks. He's gathered allies, other alphas who want access to your abilities. They're not just going to take you back, Jade. They're going to break you down completely, turn you into nothing more than a healing tool for the highest bidder. And you're different how? The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Because I'm trying to protect you, not use you. By lying to me? By manipulating me into thinking I had a choice in any of this? By keeping you alive long enough to figure out a permanent solution? His control was starting to crack, desperation bleeding through the Alpha Authority. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to fall for someone I was supposed to be protecting as an asset? The admission shocked them both into silence. Jade stared at him, searching for deception, and finding only raw honesty that looked as painful to him as it was unexpected to her. You fell for me? She whispered. I fell for you, he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Which is why I can't let you walk out that door into Victor's trap. The elevator chimed behind her, and Jade realized with growing horror that she'd waited too long to make her choice. The doors slid open to reveal Victor and two massive enforcers, their eyes glowing with predatory satisfaction. Hello, pet, Victor said, his smile cold and triumphant. Time to come home. Behind her, she heard Vander curse and reach for his weapon. But she was already moving, that strange energy finally surging to the surface as her carefully controlled world exploded into chaos. The game had changed, and this time, Jade Sterling refused to be anyone's prize. Chapter 6. Awakening Fire. The warehouse reeked of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Jade's wrists burned where the silver-laced restraints cut into her skin. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the sick satisfaction radiating from Victor as he paced around the chair they'd bound her to. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? He asked, his voice carrying that familiar blend of condescension and barely controlled rage. Did you think the Alpha King's protection meant anything against someone who truly owns you? Jade kept her eyes fixed on the warehouse's main entrance, watching for any sign of movement. Vander would come for her. She had to believe that, despite the lies and manipulation. He'd seemed genuinely panicked when Victor's men had dragged her into the elevator, his carefully controlled mask slipping to reveal something raw and desperate, unless that had been another performance. You're being very quiet, pet, Victor observed, stopping directly in front of her. Usually you're begging by now. Maybe I finally learned that begging doesn't work with monsters, she replied, meeting his gray eyes without flinching. The backhand came so fast she barely saw it, her head snapping to the side as stars exploded across her vision. But instead of the sharp pain she expected, that strange energy surged through her veins like liquid lightning. When she turned back to face him, she was smiling. Try again, she said softly. Victor's eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with suspicion. What did that bastard do to you? He showed me what I really am. The words came from somewhere deep inside her, carrying a conviction she'd never felt before. Something you tried very hard to keep buried. You're nothing but a broken beta with a useful trick, Victor snarled. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. I made you what you are. No, Jade said, that dark energy building pressure behind her ribs like steam in a boiler. You tried to cage what you couldn't understand, but cages only work if the prisoner believes she deserves to be trapped. Before Victor could respond, the warehouse's main door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Vander strode through the smoking wreckage with deadly purpose, his amber eyes glowing with barely contained fury. He moved like a predator, each step calculated and precise, his very presence filling the cavernous space with threat. Let her go, he commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the Alpha King. Victor's enforcers moved to flank him, but Vander didn't spare them a glance. His attention was locked on Victor with laser focus, as if the other man was the only thing in existence that mattered. Ah, the cavalry arrives, Victor sneered, but Jade could smell the fear beneath his bravado. Though I have to say I'm disappointed. I expected more of a challenge from the legendary Alpha King. You want a challenge? Vander asked conversationally. Let me show you one. He moved faster than humanly possible, crossing the distance between himself and the first enforcer in the blink of an eye. The sound of breaking bones echoed through the warehouse as the massive shifter crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he hit the concrete. The second enforcer shifted into his wolf form, a creature the size of a small horse with fangs designed to tear through steel. He launched himself at Vander with killing intent, but the Alpha King simply caught him mid-leap and slammed him into a support pillar with enough force to crack the concrete. "My turn," Victor growled, his own transformation beginning. But before he could complete the shift, Jade felt that strange energy explode outward from her core like a nova. The silver restraints binding her wrists simply dissolved, the metal turning to powder at her touch. She stood slowly, power coursing through her veins like molten gold. "I don't think so," she said. Victor spun toward her, his half-shifted form caught between human and wolf, and the look of absolute terror on his face was worth every moment of suffering he'd put her through. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You can't." The restraints were blessed silver. "Nothing should be able to—" "Nothing you understand," Jade corrected. She raised her hand, and Victor stumbled backward as invisible force pressed against his chest. "But then again, you never really understood what you had, did you?" The power flowing through her was intoxicating, darker and wilder than her healing abilities had ever been. This was what Victor had tried to suppress, what he'd been afraid of discovering. Not just the ability to heal, but to influence life force itself, to give or to take away. "Jade," Vander's voice cut through the haze of power, grounding her before she could lose herself entirely. "You don't have to do this." She looked at him, noting the careful distance he maintained and the cautious respect in his amber eyes. He wasn't afraid of her, but he understood that she balanced on the edge of something that could change everything. "He'll never stop," she said simply. "Men like Victor don't learn. They only escalate." "Then let me handle it," Vander said, moving closer with the slow, deliberate motions of someone approaching a dangerous animal. "That's what the crown is for, dealing with threats that the law can't touch." "And what about you?" The question burst from her lips before she could stop it. "Will you ever stop seeing me as an asset to be managed?" The pain that flashed across his features looked genuine, but she'd been fooled by his sincerity before. "I deserved that," he said quietly. "But Jade, everything I did, the surveillance, the files, the lies, it was to protect you from exactly this situation, by making the same choice Victor made, deciding what I could handle without asking me." Vander went very still. "You're right," he said, and the admission seemed to surprise them both. "I'm right there with him, aren't I? Powerful men who think they know what's best for you better than you do." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. Behind them, Victor was slowly backing toward a side exit, but she didn't take her eyes off Vander's face. "The difference," he continued, "is that I'm willing to step back and let you choose, even if that choice doesn't include me." Victor chose that moment to make his move, lunging toward the exit with desperate speed. But Jade was faster, that dark energy flowing from her in a targeted wave that sent him crashing into the warehouse wall with bone-jarring force. "I wasn't finished with you," she said conversationally, then turned back to Vander. "But I am finished being treated like a prize to be won, or a problem to be managed." "What do you want?" he asked, and the simple question carried more respect than any of Victor's commands ever had. "I want the truth, all of it, about the surveillance, about your real reasons for helping me, about what you see when you look at me." She stepped closer, that power still humming beneath her skin. "And then I want to make my own choices about what happens next. The truth is that I've been watching you for months because my intelligence network flagged you as a potential target for trafficking rings that specialize in rare shifters," Vander said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his admission. "The truth is that I was supposed to arrange for your protection through official channels, but when I saw what Victor was doing to you, I couldn't wait for bureaucracy to catch up." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "And the truth is that somewhere between planning your rescue and watching you heal from trauma that should have broken anyone else, I fell in love with your strength. Not your abilities. You." The words hit her like a physical blow, but she held his gaze. "And if I told you I needed time to figure out who I am when I'm not running or hiding or performing for someone else's expectations, then I'd give you all the time you need," he said without hesitation. even if it meant never seeing you again. Jade studied his face, searching for deception, and finding only the kind of vulnerability that couldn't be faked. The power still flowed through her veins, but it no longer felt destructive. Instead, it felt like potential, like choice. "I'll need somewhere safe to figure things out," she said carefully. "Somewhere that's mine, not a cage made of good intentions. Done. And I'll need to know that Victor can never threaten me again. Or anyone else." Vander's expression hardened as he looked toward the crumpled form by the wall. "That can be arranged. Without killing him," Jade added firmly. "I won't have his death on my conscience, even if he deserves it." "Permanent exile from shifter territory," Vander said after a moment's consideration. "Stripped of his alpha status and pack affiliations. He'll be completely alone, with no resources and no support network." Jade nodded, then walked over to where Victor lay semi-conscious against the warehouse wall. She knelt beside him, placing her hand on his chest where his heart hammered against his ribs. "I could stop this right now," she said quietly, letting him feel the dark energy that pulsed beneath her palm. "I could end your life as easily as I once healed your wounds. Do you understand that?" Terror flickered in his gray eyes as he nodded weakly. "Good," she said, standing up. "Because if you ever come near me again, if you ever threaten anyone I care about, if you even think about exploiting another shifter's abilities the way you tried to exploit mine, I will find you. And next time I won't be feeling merciful." She turned away from him and walked back to where Vander waited, no longer the broken victim who'd stumbled into Le Jardin Noir seeking help. She was something new now, something powerful and self-possessed, and entirely her own. "So," she said, looking up into those amber eyes that had seen her at her weakest, and somehow found strength there. "About that truth you promised me." Vander smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes. "I have a penthouse we should probably abandon, and a very long story about why the Alpha King's security team is terrible at their jobs. Interested?" "Extremely," Jade said, and meant it. Outside the warehouse, the city waited with all its possibilities and dangers. But for the first time in her adult life, Jade Sterling was walking into it as herself, powerful, free, and ready to write her own ending. Chapter 7. Binding Hearts. The safe house sat nestled in the mountains 2 hours outside the city, surrounded by dense forest that offered both privacy and natural barriers against unwanted visitors. Jade stood on the wraparound porch, breathing in air that smelled of pine and possibility, while Vander's security team finished their final sweep of the perimeter. 3 weeks had passed since the warehouse confrontation. 3 weeks of careful conversations and tentative rebuilding of trust. Vander had been true to his word about giving her space. He'd installed her in a luxury apartment across town while maintaining respectful distance, checking in daily but never presuming to dictate her choices. Victor's exile had been swift and absolute. Stripped of his alpha status by emergency decree of the 5 Regions Council, he'd been escorted to the Canadian border with nothing but the clothes on his back and a lifetime ban from shifter territory. The other alphas who'd conspired with him had faced similar consequences. Their trafficking network dismantled, and their victims relocated to safe houses like this one. "The perimeter is secure," Marcus, Vander's head of security, reported as he approached the porch. "Motion sensors are active and we've got teams stationed at 3-mile intervals on all access roads. Nothing gets through without us knowing about it." "Thank you," Jade said, still marveling at the surreal experience of having professional protection that didn't feel like imprisonment. "When do they rotate out?" "Every 8 hours, but they're under strict orders not to interfere unless you're in immediate physical danger. This is your space, ma'am. We're just the insurance policy." After Marcus left, Jade found herself alone with Vander for the first time since their confrontation about the surveillance files. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unfinished conversations and unresolved feelings. "You didn't have to come all the way up here just to check on the security arrangements," she said finally. "No," he agreed, leaning against the porch railing. "I came because I missed you." The honesty in his admission made her chest tight. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd found herself missing him too. Missing their evening conversations. Missing the way he looked at her like she was strong, rather than fragile. Missing the connection that had sparked between them despite the lies and manipulation. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. About what you said in the warehouse. About loving my strength, not my abilities. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what made it so hard to process. She turned to face him, noting the careful distance he maintained even now. For so long, I defined myself by what I could do for other people. First as a healer, then as Victor's tool, then as your protected asset. I never really knew who I was underneath all of that. And now? He asked gently. Now I'm starting to figure it out. She gestured toward the mountains spreading endlessly in every direction. I've been exploring my abilities. Both the healing and the other thing. Turns out, when you're not afraid of your own power, it responds very differently. What have you discovered? Jade held out her hand, palm up, and let that dark energy flow through her fingertips. Instead of the destructive force she'd wielded in the warehouse, it manifested as something almost crystalline, threads of silver light that danced between her fingers like living jewelry. It's not actually dark at all, she said wonderingly. It's life force manipulation, the other side of healing. Instead of mending what's broken, I can influence the energy that holds living things together. I can boost someone's natural healing, or I can drain it away entirely. Vander watched the display with fascination rather than fear, his amber eyes tracking the movement of light across her skin. That's incredibly rare. I've only heard of abilities like that in the oldest bloodlines. Marcus helped me research my family history while you were dealing with the council aftermath. Turns out my great-grandmother was from one of the founding packs. Her line supposedly died out during the territorial wars 2 centuries ago. She closed her fist, and the light vanished. Guess it was just dormant. The surveillance reports never mentioned anything like that, Vander said, frowning. Because I never manifested it until I was under extreme emotional stress. Victor kept me too beaten down to access my full potential, and even when I escaped, I was too afraid to explore what I was feeling. She met his eyes directly. It took feeling safe. Really safe, for it to surface properly. The implication hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Vander had given her that safety, even when she'd had every reason not to trust him. Jade, he said quietly, I need you to know that regardless of what you've discovered about your abilities, regardless of how rare or powerful you are, that's not why I know, she interrupted. That's why I asked you to come here today. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, watching his eyes widen with shock as she flipped it open to reveal a simple platinum band. You're not, he stammered, for once at a loss for words. Proposing? No, not exactly. She smiled at his obvious panic. This is a claiming band, Vander. A symbol that I'm choosing you. Not because I need protection or because you rescued me, but because I want to build something real with the man who was willing to let me walk away. Jade, I can't accept that. Not yet. You've been through too much trauma, too much upheaval. You need time to what? To decide whether my feelings are real? She stepped closer, noting how his control flickered when she entered his personal space. I've had 3 weeks to think about nothing else. 3 weeks to figure out who I am when I'm not running or hiding or being manipulated. And you know what I discovered? What? He asked, his voice rough. That the person I am, the person I choose to be, wants to be with you. Not the Alpha King. Not the powerful shifter who can protect me from my enemies. You, the man who makes terrible coffee and stays up too late reading territorial reports and trusts me enough to show me his vulnerabilities. Vander stared at the ring for a long moment, then looked up at her with something that might have been wonder. You're sure? Because once we do this, once we're claimed to each other, I'm never letting you go. I'm counting on it, she said, taking the ring from the box. But first, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. I'm not the same woman you rescued from that restaurant. I'm not going to be content staying hidden away while you make decisions about my safety. If we do this, we're partners, equals. I wouldn't want it any other way, he said, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. And I'm going to use my abilities to help other shifters like me. Victims of trafficking, people whose gifts have made them targets. I'm going to be visible, which means dangerous. Then I'll be dangerous with you. She reached for his left hand, sliding the platinum band onto his ring finger with steady fingers. Vander Greymont, I claim you as my mate, my partner, and my choice. Not because I need you, but because I want to build a life with you. The moment the metal touched his skin, power flared between them like lightning. Not the wild, uncontrolled energy she'd felt in the warehouse, but something warm and golden that seemed to weave their souls together at the deepest level. Jade Sterling, he said, his voice breaking slightly on her name. I claim you as my mate, my equal, and my heart. I promise to trust your strength, support your choices, and never again make decisions about your life without you. The bond snapped into place with an almost audible click, filling the empty spaces in her chest with warmth and certainty. This was what a real mate bond felt like. Not the possessive obsession Victor had called love, but a partnership between two people who chose each other freely and completely. So, she said, stepping into his arms as they finally closed around her. What happens now? Now we go back to the city and start building our life together, Vander said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Fair warning, though. Being mated to the Alpha King comes with certain political complications. Good thing I'm not afraid of complications anymore, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. The claiming kiss was everything their relationship had been building toward. Passionate but gentle, claiming but respectful, full of promise for the future they would create together. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I love you, Vander said, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. I love you too, she replied, marveling at how easily the admission came now that she truly understood what love was supposed to feel like. Outside their private moment, the mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of wild beauty and untamed possibilities. It seemed like the perfect metaphor for the life they were about to build together. Challenging, rewarding, and entirely their own. For the first time in her adult life, Jade Sterling was exactly where she chose to be, with exactly the person she wanted beside her. The future spread before them like an open road, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take them next. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 6 months later, Jade stood before the bathroom mirror in their shared penthouse, smoothing her hands over the elegant emerald dress Vander had surprised her with that morning. Tonight marked the 1-year anniversary of the evening she'd stumbled into Le Jardin Noir seeking sanctuary, and he'd insisted they celebrate properly. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the broken, frightened creature who'd once begged a stranger for protection. Her auburn hair gleamed with health, styled in loose waves that framed a face no longer hollow with fear. But it was her eyes that showed the most dramatic change, green depths that sparkled with confidence and purpose, instead of the haunted wariness that had defined her for so long. You look beautiful, Vander said from the doorway, his amber eyes warm with appreciation as they traveled over her form. Even after all this time, the sight of him in formal wear could still steal her breath. The perfectly tailored tuxedo emphasized his powerful frame, and the small smile playing at his lips reminded her of their private moments rather than his public authority. You clean up pretty well yourself, Alpha King, she replied, turning to face him fully. The title that had once intimidated her now felt natural, comfortable even. She'd learned to navigate the political complexities of being mated to the most powerful shifter on the continent, finding ways to use her position to advocate for causes close to her heart without compromising Vander's carefully maintained alliances. Ready for tonight? He asked, offering her his arm. More than ready. She accepted his escort, marveling at how different this felt from the countless formal events Victor had dragged her to as his silent, decorative accessory. Tonight, she would be Vander's partner in every sense of the word. His equal, his confidant, his mate by choice rather than circumstance. The ride to Le Jardin Noir passed in comfortable conversation about the initiatives they'd been working on together. The Sterling Foundation, named for Jade's maiden name at her insistence, had already established 3 safe houses for shifters with rare abilities, funded entirely by the Greymont fortune but operated according to Jade's specifications. No locks on the doors, no restrictions on movement, no decisions made without the residents' full consent and participation. The council vote went through this afternoon. Vander mentioned as their car pulled up to the restaurant's familiar facade. The anti-trafficking legislation passed unanimously. Jade's heart soared. The bill she'd helped draft would criminalize the exploitation of shifters with special abilities, carrying penalties severe enough to deter even the greediest of opportunists. More importantly, it established legal protections for victims and funding for rehabilitation programs. Victor would be furious if he knew, she said, though the thought of her former captor brought no fear now, only a grim satisfaction at the justice finally being served. Victor is too busy trying to survive as a human in a world he never bothered to understand, Vander replied. Last intelligence reports put him working as a dishwasher in some dive bar outside Edmonton. Turns out, without his alpha status and pack connections, he's just another bitter man with delusions of importance. They entered the restaurant to find their usual corner table waiting, the same spot where Vander had first offered his protection all those months ago. But this time, there were no other diners, no business meetings or political negotiations. Tonight was just for them. You reserved the entire restaurant, Jade observed as she settled into her chair. I wanted privacy for this conversation, Vander said, his expression growing serious as the sommelier approached with a bottle of champagne she recognized as older than she was. What conversation? She asked, though the butterflies in her stomach suggested she already knew. Instead of answering immediately, Vander pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, different from the one she'd presented to him at the mountain safe house, but clearly companion pieces. Her breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring that perfectly matched the platinum band already adorning his finger, but set with an emerald that exactly matched her eyes. Jade Sterling Greymont, he said, his voice carrying the same nervous tremor she remembered from their claiming ceremony. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not for politics, not for pack alliances, not for any reason except that I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else. The proposal shouldn't have surprised her. They'd discussed marriage several times in abstract terms, planning for a future that seemed increasingly certain with each passing day. But seeing the ring, hearing the words spoken aloud in the place where their story had truly begun, made it real in a way that stole her breath. Yes, she whispered, then louder, with the conviction that had carried her through every challenge of the past year. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, the emerald catching the candlelight and throwing rainbow reflections across the white tablecloth. The moment the band settled into place, their mate bond hummed with renewed strength, as if their souls were celebrating this additional layer of commitment. I love you, Vander said, lifting her hand to press a soft kiss to the ring. I love your strength, your compassion, your refusal to let anyone else define your worth. I love who you've become and who you're still becoming. I love you too, she replied, marveling at how easily the words came now. I love that you see me as an equal, that you support my choices even when they complicate your political life, that you trust me with your vulnerabilities. They sealed the engagement with a kiss that tasted of champagne and promises, of healing and hope, and the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure rather than breaking apart. So, Jade said when they finally broke apart, when do we tell the council that their Alpha King is marrying a former trafficking victim with a history of property destruction? Vander's laugh was rich and warm, filling the intimate space around them with joy. I think we lead with the Alpha King is marrying the most powerful healer warrior in 5 generations, and let them figure out the rest. Healer warrior, Jade mused, testing the title on her tongue. I like that better than rare asset or protected individual. You've earned the right to define yourself, Vander said, refilling their champagne glasses. And I've learned the wisdom of never underestimating Jade Sterling's capacity for growth. As if summoned by their conversation, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, one of the residents at their newest safe house. The message was brief but triumphant. Got the job, head nurse at Children's Hospital. Thank you for believing in me. Jade showed Vander the screen, both of them smiling at this small but significant victory. Sarah had been rescued from a trafficking ring only 3 months ago. Her healing abilities exploited by captors who'd kept her sedated and isolated for over a year. Now she was rebuilding her life, reclaiming her profession, and finding strength she'd never known she possessed. How many more like her are out there? Jade wondered aloud. Too many, Vander replied soberly. But everyone we find, every law we pass, every safe house we establish brings us closer to ending this completely. They spent the rest of the evening planning not just their wedding, but their continued work together. The Sterling Foundation would expand to include job training programs and legal advocacy services. Vander would use his political influence to strengthen international anti-trafficking treaties. Together, they would transform their personal tragedy into a force for systematic change. As the night drew to a close, they found themselves standing on the restaurant's balcony, looking out over the city lights that had once seemed so threatening and now felt full of possibility. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been at that meeting the night I showed up? Jade asked, leaning against Vander's chest as his arms encircled her waist. Every day, he admitted, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. But then I remember that some things are meant to be. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes when it comes to true mates. Jade smiled, thinking of the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain and fear and desperate choices that had seemed like endings at the time, but had actually been beginnings in disguise. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories grew from the deepest wounds, watered with tears and strengthened by the decision to trust again, despite every reason not to. What are you thinking about? Vander asked, sensing her contemplative mood through their bond. Just that a year ago, I thought my life was over. I was convinced that no one would ever see me as anything more than damaged goods. She turned in his arms to face him directly. And now I'm engaged to the Alpha King, running a foundation that helps people like me, and stronger than I've ever been in my life. You were always strong, he corrected gently. You just needed the right circumstances to recognize it in yourself, and the right partner to help me see it, she added, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. Below them, the city hummed with life and energy, full of people fighting their own battles and searching for their own sanctuaries. Some would find them, as Jade had found hers in the most unexpected place with the most unlikely person. Others would keep searching, but they would have allies now. Safe houses and legal protections, and advocates who understood their struggles because they had lived them. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and purpose. There would be challenges, certainly, and setbacks, and moments of doubt, but they would face them together, as partners and equals, committed to building a world where no one had to choose between safety and freedom. As they prepared to leave the restaurant where their story had begun, Jade caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors. The woman looking back at her was confident, purposeful, and completely at peace with who she had become. She was Jade Sterling Greymont, healer-warrior, advocate, survivor, and soon-to-be wife to the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. Most importantly, she was exactly who she chose to be. And that, more than any title or position or power, was the greatest victory of all.